Welcome to PWS United, a podcast for the Prader-Willi syndrome community, brought to you by PWSA USA. This podcast gives the latest news in research, advocacy, and family support by bringing together staff, volunteers, PWS treatment specialists, biotech and pharmaceutical representatives, caregivers, family members, and individuals with PWS. Our goal is to share education, awareness, and resources with those living with PWS and their supporters. Join us in our mission to enhance the quality of life and empower those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome.
In recognition of National Make a Will Month, PWSA USA sat down with Shelley Smith to shine a light on the lasting impact of thoughtful planning, enduring love, and the legacy that one family left behind. Before we begin, we want to point out that you may notice a few brief moments in our conversation where an unstable internet connection may have affected the recording quality. The heart of Shelley's story and the message of this conversation does remain fully intact. PWSA USA recently came to know Shelley through her role as caregiver to her cousin Karen Bennett, who lived with Prader-Willi syndrome and passed away in December of 2025 at the age of 68. Through Shelley, we've begun to learn a story that spans decades of devotion, caregiving, advocacy, and planning by Karen's parents, Karen's extended family, and those who loved her the most. In this conversation, Shelley reflects on Karen's life, her family's commitment to ensuring that she was cared for throughout her lifetime with PWS, and the legacy gift that will help support many generations of individuals with PWS and the people who love and care for them. We're very grateful to Shelley for joining us and trusting us with her family's story. Again, this episode is more than planning and legacy. It's about how families show up for one another, provide support over many generations, and create lives filled with love, purpose, and possibility. I began our conversation by asking Shelley to help us get to know Karen and to share what she would like the PWS community to know about her dear cousin.
I had to write down some notes because there's so much to know about Karen. She was funny, she was warm, she was sometimes stubborn, and she loved her family. She also loved to go and do things. I mean, she was very cultural, and we were lucky to have a caregiver that enjoyed the same things. So Karen went on cruises, Karen went out to plays. She loved all of that. In fact, her dad always said, it was a very funny joke in our family. He said that Karen would attend the opening of an envelope because all you had to do was say, even just to say, "Karen, I need to go to the grocery store." "Okay, let's go." She was wonderful. She understood about having Prader-Willi. She Her parents were so good planning things for her, explaining things to her. It was wonderful, and she tried really hard to not take the cookies or not take the candy or not try to figure out a way to get food. But it was very hard. And her parents, they explained to me when they asked me to take care of her that this was like having a drug addiction. She couldn't help herself, which I did understand because, we'd spent a lot of time together, but she tried so hard. And I'm so proud of her for doing that because it was difficult at times.
Yeah, as a parent who has a young child with PWS, these are things I'm just starting to figure out. How do you respond in these situations? How do you love them the best that you can, despite some of the limitations that they may have in their ability, maybe to understand some things or to participate in things in a typical way. But it sounds like this was really a part of your life early on. Can you tell us, some of your favorite memories? What would you say made Karen uniquely Karen? And then, how early do you remember learning about Willie syndrome and learning about how she was different?
I remember as a young girl going to Dulles Airport with my parents to pick up Karen and Aunt Liz, Karen's mom. They had lived in New Mexico. My uncle worked for IBM and they lived a lot of different places. And I remember going to the airport and she was probably 18 months to 2 years. And I remember she was kind of, and I'm using this word because I've read it in literature from Prader-Willi, she was kind of floppy, you
Yeah.
know? And I thought, I mean, at that point, I don't know that Aunt Liz knew what was going on, and she was walking, but I knew there was something physically going on with her. She was funny and cute and adorable, and so then they moved upstate New York, so we didn't see them often. We would talk to them, see them on occasion, and then they moved to Bethesda, Maryland, and so then I was that's near I live in Maryland, so I would go there and stay with them, and that's when I for the summer, like a week or 2, and that's when I really started seeing, the food situation and my aunt watching her and Aunt Liz, I always said she's the best dietitian in the whole world, nutritionist, because she would often say to me, I know how to prepare Karen's plate with not a lot of high calorie things. And as long as Karen thought that she was getting more than enough food, that she wasn't being taken away from, she was as happy as she could be. She lived with her parents until she was about 50 years old. They moved from Bethesda when my uncle retired to Chestertown, which is originally where they were both from, and which is about 20 minutes from me. They realized they were getting older and that they had to make some kind of plan. My aunt, because I think she had spent her whole entire life taking care of Karen, was not very happy about that idea, but my uncle said, there was a facility in Chestertown called Kent Center for people with disabilities. They had houses, they had, day programs, and, finally they decided it was probably the best thing, so she did go there. She lived, like, I don't know, 5 minutes from my aunt and uncle,
Mhm.
and in the in the beginning, my aunt went there every single day and prepared the meal plan and did that for a good while, then kind of backed off, didn't go every day. But, she was very concerned back then that they weren't gonna be able to take care of her, and Aunt Liz had done such a wonderful job. She kept Karen's weight under control, but it was a lot for them because they had to lock the refrigerator up at night, and they told me stories about how Karen had figured out a way to get out of the house at night and go to a grocery store. And, she was just scared. She was afraid something was gonna happen. But it did work out well once Karen went there, and once Karen went to that house, she had a couple of roommates, and she thought she had her own home, At one point, she said to the ladies that were there who were lovely, "You work for me."
Like they
Remember
had to help, right?
Yeah. And I remember Aunt Liz was like, "Hold on, hold it. This is not happening," But she adjusted well, but it was still very, very difficult for my aunt. Very, very difficult.
I can as a parent, I can only imagine. For context, can you also just tell us, so Karen was an only child, and then also what was the age difference between the 2 of you?
Yes, she was an only child, and she was 68 and I was 73.
So like a big sister almost in the dynamic.
Yes, in fact, that did change from the cousin feel to more of a
Yeah.
sister. Because after Aunt Liz passed away at first, and then Uncle Bill passed away about 8 years later, she and I became very close, and I felt this connection from her that she felt at times I was would she would say something to me like, we're cousins." And I'd say, "Yes, we are." And I said, "But we're like sisters." And she would laugh, but
Yes.
she really came very dependent upon me, and, she would call me every day at 4 o'clock, whether she was happy as a clam or mad as a hornet because she thought somebody was taking her food away.
Yeah. So at what point do you remember having this conversation with your aunt and uncle about becoming Karen's guardian, and how long after that did it become a reality for you?
What's funny, one of the things is when, oftentimes as the years have gone by since Aunt Liz and Uncle Bill have gone, people would say, "You're Karen's guardian." I was not Karen's guardian. Karen's parents were not her guardians after 18. She would not allow that to happen because she said if she had a guardian, she could not vote in the election. And I believe that is true. And she did like to vote in the election. Uncle Bill would sit down with her, they would go over everything, and he would take her to vote. So, at the very end, about 3 months before she passed away, she said, "Maybe you should be my guardian." And I said,
Mhm.
"Oh, I think we're
I
okay,"
think you're okay.
Yeah. I I remember when Aunt Liz, she called me one day and she said, "Can I come over to see you?" And I said, "Sure you can." So she came over and she said, "I have to ask you a question." And I said, "Okay, what is it?" And she said, "We need someone to look after Karen when we're gone." And I said, "Of course I will." She said, "Hold up a moment." She goes, "Wait a second."
There's more.
Yeah, she said, "Do you realize what I'm asking you?" And I said, I do." And she goes, "Well, you might think you do, but you really don't." And so, she started talking to me, and she and Uncle Bill over the next several years, they would talk to me about things. Like sometimes when Karen would get upset, she would call me and she'd start yelling if something had happened to her food-wise. And I remember my Uncle Bill saying, "All you have to do is say, 'Karen, if you don't stop yelling, I'm not gonna talk to you.'" And he said, "And then just hang up the phone." Well, it was almost impossible for me to do that because I wanted to make her happy. Because she was so upset. Well, I finally got to that point, and he said, "If you do that, she'll probably never mention the whole situation again." And she didn't. But boy,
Wow.
that was hard. That was really, really hard. And she I guess she did not go to live at Kent Center until she was, I'm gonna say 50. She went there at 50, so she'd been there about 18 years, I think. And she was Kent Center had a small secondhand store
Mhm.
that Karen worked the cash register. And when I would have Karen out in the community, they'd be people would come up and say, "Oh, hi, Hi, Karen. How you doing? Oh, Karen, it's nice to see you. What's happening in the store?" And I would be like, everybody knew her. Everybody knew her. And she just had this big smile on her face, and it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And she had a lot of people at Kent Center that had been there a long time as she had. And I wanted to touch on, she wasn't really diagnosed until she was 21. She They were trying to find, they'd gone to many different doctors. They went to Johns Hopkins and nobody could figure it out. And a lot of these doctors at hospitals would say, "We're not exactly sure what it is, but we think you just should go home, let her be comfortable. She's not going to live a very long life." So somehow I don't remember how this happened, but they went to NIH in Washington and they went to see this doctor. And Aunt Liz said they went in, and when they sat down, she started talking about Karen's symptoms and this and that. And this doctor said, "You're not going to believe this, but I just read a medical paper yesterday, and it's about a disease called Prader-Willi." And they started talking, and that's how they found out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've heard a
And
lot of stories of people getting diagnosed later in life, especially, 30, 40 years ago. And it's because, one doctor somewhere had seen one other child, or one doctor somewhere had been a part of someone's grand rounds at a, uh, advanced clinical center of some kind. And then, by sheer luck, person who had that information was on board for the next conversation. You know,
oh, yeah.
even today, people with PWS sometimes are diagnosed at birth, like within a few weeks while they're in the NICU. And then in other cases, sometimes later in childhood and as young adults. And of course, the
Mhm.
longer it is before you're diagnosed, the more challenging it can be to make adjustments to diet or to get the right care. So that's a real struggle. It sounds like you're in. An uncle really pushed hard and for a long time to get to the
They
bottom
did.
of it,
They
which
really did.
speaks volumes to them as parents and caregivers and certainly to your whole family.
Yeah, they were wonderful. They were wonderful. My aunt devoted her life to Karen. My uncle, as I said, worked for IBM and he traveled a lot and she was alone with Karen. And I remember in the summer staying with her and Karen had had some dental issues and, you know, I remember her she was very happy that I was there with her to go to the dental office because it was a big deal, a really big deal. And, she just I don't know. I'm proud of her too. She was a wonderful, wonderful mother, and he was a wonderful father, and they were just great. I miss them very much. I miss them all very much.
Well, I mean, we've spoken a couple of times and had some pretty important conversations, you and I, in the short time we've known each other. But I feel like I don't want to undermine the importance of what you said earlier. You know, you talked about your aunt calling you and saying there's something important I have to talk to you about. And her saying it very, casually, but with a lot of intent. And you very quickly saying, "Oh, but for sure, of course."
Mhm.
But coming out the other side of this story, having done the caregiving, having watched Karen's decline, having grieved her, buried her, been through this process. I want to say, as a parent to someone with PWS who's like new in her journey, like we as parents, we agonize having to even think about these decisions. And the idea that your Aunt Liz saw in you, and saw in this partner that was going to be equally devoted and dedicated and kind-hearted and patient and all of the things that you would learn in your journey that you would have to be like I don't think I want to make sure you know that it's not small that you so quickly said of course because these
Well, thank
conversations are tough conversations and I feel like I want to make sure you get a chance to talk a little bit selfishly for yourself about what did it mean to you that they asked and what did the journey after that from that point on how did it affect
well, they asked me, and of course, they were still in good health, and as I said, they had this perfect way of kind of introducing telling me different things, every once in a while, or if I was with their family, if something
like teaching you.
happened. Yes, teaching me, exactly, in
Yeah.
the most wondrous way, and, you know, it I don't wanna sound that it was not a burden to me, it was not, but it was a lot the last year of Karen's life, and I remember thinking, I wanna do everything that her parents wanted, I'm gonna do everything, and I remember saying to my husband, I just feel like, "Am I doing this right? Am I doing" he was wonderful because he said to me one day, I think after Karen died, he said, "You did everything like they would wanted you to." But it was still hard, and, when she passed away and she passed away on Christmas Day, which was extremely sad, and I I just felt because I had spent so much time with her at the last probably the last 7 months, and she I just I felt like there was such a big part of me missing. I remember just thinking, "Oh my gosh," my purpose was taking care of her. I love taking care of her. Again, we had wonderful days and we had some not so wonderful days,
Mhm.
but I knew in a minute she would be, as happy as a clam. But I it's been I think I'm adjusting, but oh my gosh, I missed that 4 o'clock phone call.
Mm.
because she just exuded love, she loved me and I loved her, and, the same with their whole family. She would be so funny in these last couple of years. My, husband would go and pick her up at Christmas time. We always had a Christmas Eve together, and she would come in, and she wouldn't even have her coat off, and she loved to give us gift cards for Christmas, and she'd be she'd be passing out these gift cards before Dick got her coat off her back. And, she would come in and she would walk around the kitchen and to see what we were having, and I remember one year she said to me, Melanie, she goes, "No sweet potatoes?" I said, "Uh, yeah, no sweet potatoes." She said, "Well, you had them last year." And I said, "Well, I did, but," I said, "you really are the only person that likes sweet potatoes." And she's like, "Okay." And I said, "Don't worry, we'll have them next year for sure." And so she would kind of go around and somebody would fix her a little plate of hors d'oeuvres or whatever and give her Diet Coke. And so then we would have dinner. And as soon as she finished her dinner, she'd say to my husband, "I'm ready to go home." And I'd be like, "Karen, please, please stay. Let's watch
Yeah.
something TV, a Christmas movie." No, no, ready to go home. So Dick would get her in the car and he would take her home. So he'd come back and, I was a little bit sad. And he would say, "Shelley, don't be sad." He said, "She wanted to go to her home. She feels good going back to her home. She loves being with us, but when dinner's over, she wants to go home." So,
It sounds like living at that in that environment gave her a sense of real independence that, not every adult with PWS necessarily gets to experience. It sounds like she really appreciated being a part of your home and your family, but also just having her own realm and her own things and her own place to go back to, you
oh,
know,
exactly,
that's
exactly.
amazing.
It was amazing. And when Karen passed away, one of her caregivers, she kind of semi-retired, but she took Karen to church every Sunday. And Karen loved it. She loved going to that church. And so when Karen passed away, I said to her name was Miss Louise, who we love, Miss Louise. I said, "I'd like to have your minister do Karen's service." And she said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of everything." So she did. She did. And
Aw.
it was wonderful. So she took care of everything. And, I I I remember standing up because so many people came to her funeral that had been former caregivers, uh, her people that she had just known forever, and they all got up and they just were talking about her and how they were gonna miss her, and it was just as sad as I was. I couldn't help but smile. I remember standing up, thanking people for coming and crying my eyes out because I was missing Karen, but they
Yeah.
were kind of tears of joy that she made such an impact on these people, all of her friends. It was, I'll never forget that ever.
Well, and that you were able to continue in the way that her parents wanted for her, that you were able to facilitate that independence and that balance between having like family connections and caregivers and people looking out for her, but also having this life where she made her own friends and had her own relationships and a part-time job and a church community and all of these things. Like it sounds like you couldn't have done a better job in honoring what your aunt and uncle really wanted for her. And it sounds like she really recognized that you had a hand in that in your time together in those last years and months. So that's a really beautiful thing to have. I mean, that's an amazing gift to have been
Yes,
able to give her. And it sounds like you perceive it as a gift to yourself that you had the honor to participate in that way, which is
that's very true. Very true.
shifting gears just a little bit. Do you remember at any point in Karen's journey your aunt and uncle or you like connecting to PWSA USA or
I I didn't, after they asked me to be Karen's caretaker, Uncle Bill did give me, he gave me a bunch of little booklets that were spiral bound. I don't know if you still have them.
We have
Uh,
some, yes.
yes, he gave me those and he said, "Give one of these to every person that's involved with Karen. Make sure they
Mhm.
have this." And I remember, talking about to Uncle Bill about something about Karen, and I said he goes, "Oh, I'll call PWS and ask them what they have to think about it." But I don't ever remember them saying, "We've called." I don't know how they knew about you. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like they, as parents, probably, I mean, PWSA has been around for 50 years now. So it's probably likely that whether it was a phone call, newsletter, or something that they were of the journey along the way. And it seems like that's something they remembered and wanted to ensure would be there for the future.
Yes, well, I
So,
do remember when Uncle Bill, towards the end of his life, I was helping him do his bills and that kind of thing, and I remember him saying, "Here, I've gotten a fundraising letter from you guys," and he said, "Please, write out the check," and I said, "Will do."
yeah, that's that's very kind. So
Yes.
so as you help to kind of tie up these loose ends since Karen's passing and you carry forward, your aunt and uncle's wishes and you remember the life and the relationship with Karen, what do you this gift from your family will mean for individuals with PWS and all people who love them? What do you hope this will do?
Well, I think and I really want the same, I think there weren't that many resources back when Karen was younger, and I think that Aunt Liz and Uncle Bill and myself, you know, this will give, money for opportunities for research. I think they had hoped because, they told me at one point that this was gonna happen because they were they were the best preparers of everything in life.
Yeah.
I just think they wanted others to be able to have things, learn things, hopefully, as I said, for research. And that I hope that too. I just want it to be used all for good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in getting to know you, I've had a little bit of a chance to talk with you ways PWSA supports families. And of course, this gift being given, which, we did receive funds today. So thank you for
You're
arranging that.
welcome.
This gift being given, doesn't end your PWS journey. I mean, you may not have Karen to care for, but you're a part of the PWS family for now.
Thank you.
And, you may encounter others in your lifetime who have a loved one with PWS. So having you as an ally and knowing um, that this gift is going to help to make sure that families who are receiving a diagnosis today and tomorrow and yesterday are going to have a place that they can call to get advice about all kinds of things. And, all of the ways that we help people, whether it's helping families that have school age children figure out how to have an IEP and a safe school experience, or working on Capitol Hill to advocate for research and treatments for people with PWS. All this is happening now, actively every day with a growing team of people at the table. So all of these resources are going to fuel that and supercharge it, and hopefully allow us to do even more. So
That's one.
so as you reflect on this journey of being a caregiver and now, um, settling this estate and doing all of these things to sort of carry out the life's wishes of your aunt and uncle, what would you want other families to take away from the story or to know or to really think as, as they age or as their loved one with us is aging? It's a difficult, sensitive topic of conversation, but it's very real to you. And you've been through it and you're going through it. So what advice do
As you said, thinking about what's gonna happen later on and also too for Aunt Liz and Uncle Bill, they were very lucky that they had Kent Center near them, that Karen could be there and, but I know they worried so much about what was gonna happen. I'm sure they worried that even me, taking care of her, they were still worried. I remember my aunt, Liz passed away from breast cancer, and she'd had breast cancer and it came back. And she said to me when she was in the hospital, when we knew that she was not gonna, get over this, she said, "You're not gonna like what I'm gonna say." And I said, "Oh boy," because she was pretty blunt. So I said, "Well, go ahead." And she said, "I have prayed that Karen would pass away before Bill and I." And I remember crying and saying, she goes, "No, I don't mean that as mean." She said, I don't want to leave her here." And I remember saying, "But I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take care of her." And she just said, "As a mother, you just don't, as a mother of a child with Prader-Willi, you can't understand that." And I understand what she was saying, but I did understand what she meant. So, but knowing if you were, if you leave a legacy after you pass on, it could help your child if your child is still here, but it could help many other people. And you know what you've been through in your life. And to know that it's helpful to everybody. And for me, I look at it as just spreading love. They just spread love with their donation. And I don't know what else to say about that. I know this is something they wanted to do because they told me about it, but I think, it made them feel great doing it.
I think that the way you described the feeling that you have about this legacy gift being realized, like today, literally like an hour before our call is when I was
Mhm.
notified. It's exactly the smile you had and exactly the tone you had when you talked about the enthusiasm with which Karen was received by everyone she encountered. This sort of very authentic, very true, very positive, warm presence. And so the idea that somewhere later this week, some new family is going to receive the news their child has PWS, and they're going to get a phone call from us, from a warm voice congratulating them on their beautiful child and offering them a lifetime of resources and tools and emotional support. Like that's the feeling that I carry with me hearing your story is just knowing that every family's journey is going to maybe be a little brighter and a little more supported because of this groundwork that your aunt and uncle laid early on and because of the legacy of care that you gave to Karen, which is just it's such a beautiful story. My son Henry is 15 years old. I don't have a big family. I don't have a lot of people in my circle. And so I wonder one day if I'll have this conversation with my own child about caregiving or guardianship or anything like that. But you've made it sound so seamless and so beautiful. I know that it was certainly probably wrought with harder days sometimes,
Mm. Sometimes,
but
yeah.
but I think you've done a great honor to your family by stepping into this role and by doing it with such dedication to what you know their wishes were. And it sounds like Karen really did look to you like a big sister and a bright light. And I hope that hearing this story and hearing, the message will be an inspiration to other families that are, needing to have these conversations, needing to speak frankly about providing care for their loved one, about, resources after they're gone, about making sure that their families on their PWS journey can have the hope and that maybe they had from PWSA USA. So I think it's really lovely. It's really great to talk to you.
Well, thank you so very much. They Karen was she was Care Bear, as we sometimes would call her. And she was a delight. She was just a delight. And, because as you know, I mean, it's a struggle. It's a struggle every day. But Aunt Liz and Uncle Bill had it all figured out, from when they figured out what was going on with Karen till they left this earth. She was very healthy. She was so healthy until the last year of her life. Amazing because people would say, is Karen in the hospital very much?" No, Karen's never been in the hospital since she had her tonsils found, and but, she started with congestive heart failure, and that was just leading down the path, but, yeah, she was something else.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're something else too. And
Thank
that's
you.
very
Thanks very much.
inspiring. And, I want to make sure you know how grateful we are, PWSA, not just for this gift, but for you being willing to talk about these things frankly, tell your story, share all this love and care and commitment that has, shaped your aunt and uncle's life and shaped your life. And then, more importantly, that PWSA feels just very deeply grateful for the trust that your family has placed in us. And maybe I'll become your new 4 o'clock phone call. Maybe we'll have a phone call where I can share with you all of the ways that, every couple of months or so, stories about ways this gift is making a difference so that you can continue to heal and feel positively about the impact this is making.
Thank you for listening to this episode of PWS United. If you want to learn more about Prader-Willi syndrome and how PWSA USA is making strides in advocacy, family support, and research, visit www.pwsausa.org. And while you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our Pulse email newsletter to stay informed about the latest news, resources, and events. Don't forget to subscribe to the PWS United podcast so you never miss an episode. Our team is always available to support families and their loved ones living with PWS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call us at 941-312-0400 or email info@pwsausa.org. Catch a new episode next Tuesday, and until then, have a great week.